event in the calendar for the JCCV. For those who are not familiar with the JCCV, we are the peak body for Australia, for Victorian jury, and we are taking on much more of a leadership role in the child protection space. I'm Michelle Meyer, and I'm the Child Protection Officer. That's my portfolio on the executive of the Jewish Community Council of Victoria. So welcome to everybody. This topic has been certainly well subscribed to. We are very excited to have so many participants today. This is a very important topic, and it relates to many parts of the Jewish community, with particularly in schools, youth movements, etc. So we will move on and start this event. I welcome Rachel Averbukh, who is very experienced in this child safeguarding space. And Rachel, you can introduce yourself further, but she's got a wealth of experience, and we welcome her to moderate today's event. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everybody today. I'm thrilled that you could all be here. This is certainly a topic that is of great interest, I think, not just to our community, but across the board. So because we have such a short amount of time, I will get straight way stuck into it because I'm really excited to introduce you to our panellists today. Just some short housekeeping details. Please remain on mute unless, of course, you've been called upon to speak, to try and eradicate some of our background noise. We are recording today's session and we will make it readily available throughout our extended networks, and we encourage you to share it widely. If you do have any questions, please pop it in the chat, and Michelle will be moderating that. If you have any concerns or questions, please use the chat function there. And we will hopefully leave 15 minutes or so at the end to get to questions. I expect that we will run out of time very quickly. So at the end of the session, I'll talk a little bit about how we might be able to gauge some more of your feedback around how today's session went, and if you have any other areas of particular interest. So without further ado, welcome to the panel discussion today for understanding and responding to harmful sexual behaviours. It is and can be a very uncomfortable topic. So if you feel that you've been affected by any of the material discussed today, we will share some suggested resources for you at the end of the session today that you can make use of. Today, we are very, very lucky to have 4 very esteemed colleagues who will be presenting and sharing their wisdom with us today. So what I might do is I might actually allow them the opportunity to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their background and potentially their knowledge in this sector, but also if they've had any contact specifically with the Jewish community. So we might start with you, Britt. Britt Pencharz is the Deputy Area Operations Manager of the Southern Melbourne area for the Department of Health and Human Services. Most people who have worked in anything to do with child protection will know Britt. She is a well-known staple within DHHS, but also, more importantly, she's been a very well-known contact for the Jewish community to reach out when there are specific areas of concern. So welcome, Britt, and please take the floor. Sorry, Britt, I think you might be on mute.
I was. I just
there we go.
Has to happen to someone. Thank you for that introduction. I'm first just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm now part of the Department of Fairness, Families and Housing, as we've changed our name, DFFH, just to make our lives more complicated. I've worked in child protection for 26 years now, and pretty much mostly been in Southern Melbourne, in South Division, which really covers a lot of the areas that the Jewish community mainly reside in. I currently manage one of our 3 of our investigation and response teams. So they do the first visits to families living in Southern Melbourne area, which is sort of Springvale to Cooey-Rupp, fairly big distance areas, and part of South Division, as I mentioned before. I also manage the sexual abuse investigation team, which works alongside police and sits in a multidisciplinary centre with police and SECASA and family violence services, specific to, for Dandenong sort of area and catchment. In terms of the Jewish community, I have 2 children that are attending King David School, so part of the community, and people have just found it a bit easier to help navigate child protection and have someone that has a bit of an understanding and a cultural lens to help find the right people to go to and translate some of the community specific issues along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Britt, and thank you very much for picking up that terrible oversight for forgetting to do our acknowledgement to country. So a very good early pickup. So thank you and apologies to everyone for that slip up. We might head now to Murray Geddes, who is the principal of a remarkable school called the Lookout School. And Murray, I'd love it if you could give us a little bit of backstory to the school that you are in charge of.
Certainly. Well, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for having me here. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm speaking to you from the beautiful Bunurong land down near Frankston today. My name's Murray Geddes and I'm the principal of the Lookout Centre. We're a virtual centre. We don't actually have a school building. And we're in southeast Victoria, which we cover from Port Melbourne to Mallacoota. Across that space, we've got around 2,600 young people in statutory care. So they're young people who no longer, for one reason or another, live with their parents, and they could be in a foster care, kinship, residential care, lead tenant, or at times incarcerated. And so we cover all of those groups of kids. We work very closely with Britt and her teams at Child Protection, DHHS or DFFH now, and that's a real partnership. And we're honoured to be one of the few organisations that have a foot in many camps when it comes to redressing some of the disadvantage of young people in statutory care. What else can I tell you? The acknowledgement is really important for us, mainly because about 1% of our population is Aboriginal or from Torres Strait Island across Victoria. Currently in southeast Victoria, I think about 23.5% of our kids are Aboriginal or from the Torres Strait Islands, so well and truly overrepresented. We're also one of the few organisations that covers government, Catholic and independent school sectors. I've had a couple of the Jewish schools reach out over the last few years for assistance with young people in care. We also work with all the community service organisations, Aboriginal controlled community service orgs, carer groups, youth justice, you name it. So within our team, I have learning advisors, we have early childhood learning advisors, we've got a careers advisor, a cultural advisor, a psychologist, and we're about to launch into youth justice as well. So it's a ever expanding space. And look, can I congratulate you for having a session on this topic, because it's mighty important to get this right.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Murray, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be able to support this conversation today. Next, I'd like to introduce Suzanne Copsey. Suzanne is here from the SECASA AWARE program, and I think that program in particular is going to be quite an interesting point of topic today. So Suzanne, if you'd like to introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about the program as well, that would be great.
Sure thing. Hi everyone, I'm Suzanne Copsey. I'm the clinical lead for the AWARE program. We're a program that sits within SECASA, which you would probably know as the Southeastern Centre Against Sexual Assault. Predominantly our services provide counselling for victims of sexual assault and family violence, but we also have a team of clinicians here. There's 6 of us, and we run the program called the AWARE program. It's not an acronym for anything, which is a bit confusing, but the AWARE program is set up to respond to young people who engage in harmful and abusive sexual behaviours. So we're the clinicians that are doing the clinical work with this client group and their families and carers. So we predominantly work with kids aged between 10 and 17 who have engaged in harmful sexual behaviour or have been alleged to have engaged in a harmful sexual behaviour. We do work with younger kids as well when needed, as it's not only 10-year-olds and above that engage in these behaviours. That's a case-by-case basis, but we're generally funded for 10 to 17-year-olds. But if a kid under 10 really needs to come see us, we'll make that work. So we provide assessment and intervention to that client group. So we're a team of, sorry, my lights have just gone off. They're on a sensor. There we go, I'm back. We're a team of psychologists and social workers that provide that here in Dandenong. So we're at the MDC Centre, the Multidisciplinary Centre, along with the SOCIT police and the SECASA child protection workers. We sometimes can work from other sites, but due to our large caseloads and small group of us, we predominantly have to operate out of Dandenong here. And that's what we do.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And last and certainly not least, and hopefully that I will pronounce your name correctly, Bryce, we are very fortunate to have Detective Senior Sergeant from Dandenong SOCIT, Bryce Pettett. Is that correct? Close?
No, that was spot on.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent. So just for those who don't know, SOCIT stands for the Sexual Offences and Child Investigation Team within Vic Police. So take it away, Bryce. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. As stated, my name's Bryce Pettett, and I'm the officer in charge of the Dandenong SOCIT. We, like SECASA and Department of Human Services, are stationed at the Dandenong MDC, Multidisciplinary Centre, which is actually the state's largest MDC. And I would hope to think that we're probably the best practice of all the MDCs, a concept that's only really been with Victoria Police probably for the last 6 or 7 years. But we are in a position where we've developed specialised skills in investigating sexual assault matters for both adults and children. And we deal with, dealing with the victim in the first instance, and then we also proceed and deal with the offender through the criminal justice system. The key to this facility is the working together with the other agencies so that we can case manage particular client needs, both adults and children. And we've found generally that it is an exceptionally good practice system, and we've had some fantastic results in looking after the welfare of victims. The idea of this facility is we call it a one-stop shop. So our victims our victims approach and can have their counselling with the SECASA people. They can have medical examinations here. They can have, touch services with some Eastern health agencies. Health nurses are on site. We have a number of other NGOs that offer support and systems to clients, what we refer to as our clients. And up until this particular point, or a recent thing that's occurred at this particular point, they can actually make their court appearances from this building here as well. So it's not a traditional police station. It's not, there's no signage out the front that says it's police. We try to make it as anonymous as we possibly can to create an atmosphere of less tension and stress for our victims, be they adults or children. And, I think the comfort factor for the victim upon entering this facility, that they can get everything done here rather than getting referrals and going to other buildings and other places. We generally have an extremely good success rate.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone, and welcome to our panellists. So I'm really looking forward to getting straight into this topic. I will say that as a social worker who specialises in developing safeguarding policy and operational practice and procedures, this is a topic that is certainly growing, and I think it's something that's quite well known within the safeguarding experts, but certainly it's now becoming something that is far more tangible and more well known to parents, teachers, youth leaders alike. And I think the concept of peer-to-peer abuse in particular is particularly confronting for people. And one of the parts that I think most people really struggle with is that potentially we have two victims to attend to in these circumstances. And so the way we proceed is not necessarily the same way that we would proceed if there was an adult involved in the circumstance. So certainly that creates some challenge in this space, and to understand some of the complexity around that. As a parent myself with children within a Jewish day school, I know too well that within the Jewish community in particular, things don't stay quiet for very long. And so often people feel that they're doing a great service to individuals if they keep things quiet, or if they quietly move a child who's displayed some form of problematic behaviour to another school. And so certainly this is a topic that is relevant for the Jewish community, as well as any other closed community whereby people are very cautious about how they share this information. So I think one of the key points that hopefully everyone will take away from today's session is that there is absolutely a vast array of support available, and we will make sure that we have some links to additional supports and services available when we send out the recording. But without further ado, I'd like to get straight into the heavy questions. I might start with you, Bryce, if that's okay. Maybe we should just start with the basics around what are harmful sexual behaviours. So maybe more around maybe some of the stats, the prevalence of it, and the definition as such for those who may not be as familiar, from your perspective, of course.
Yeah, it's probably a very big definition. What are harmful sexualised behaviours? We all have our own perception of what, through our own growing up process, through our teens, and if I could use a term, our discovery of life and the implications of intimate relationships. And we all, I guess, think we know the best way that should occur, and whether it's the way it occurred for us and all those sort of things. We live in a very IT savvy world these days, however, and the access that children have to computerized devices that can access the internet and all the wonders that that domain can share with kids. The kids of today's knowledge in regard to sexual behaviour, full stop, is probably far in excess of anything that we ever had the ability to access. So the internet access for children is extremely problematic, and what can be deemed by the youth of today as a normal behaviour can often, in many instances, be harmful. So all children, and I'm certainly not an expert psychologist or anything, but all children go through a discovery phase in their lifetime, and we hope that it's practiced in what we would determine to be a calm pattern, but unfortunately we have people that are either victims of abuse themselves, that's children, or children that have had a lot of been confronted with a lot of inappropriate material on the internet that really can have a misguided view of what is normal. From a legal perspective, obviously any unwelcome touching, sexual contact, even language to a degree, and the bullying aspects can be not only harmful but criminal. And when it gets to the point of being a criminal offence, we then are often called upon to go and investigate whatever the situation or the allegations may be. We do that at this particular facility. Our staff are trained in dealing with children specifically, and we don't put them through a very formal statement-taking process. Our staff are trained to do what's called a VARE interview, which is a video and audio recording interview, and it's a far gentler way of dealing and extracting valid information from children. The problems associated with children historically have been getting them to clearly articulate from a legal perspective of what's occurred to them, and using language that is sometimes difficult to extract from children. when we investigate matters against certain offence types and classes, we have to address certain elements, and it can have some difficulties. Fortunately, the courts have moved forward, and our legal system, while not as up to date as I would like it to be, is starting to catch up with the issues of trying to extract information from children. And obviously, I'm talking here very young children. The process of kids, when they're young, there's a lot of exploratory behaviour, and that's just that maybe that somebody, no matter the sex of the child, they see something on another child that they don't have, or that's different, and they will certainly question that. You know, with very young children, it can be innocent touching on occasions, but it's where the police involvement really comes into the fore is when it's probably a little bit more aggressive than that. The children are acting out either what they've seen or what they've heard or what they've experienced themselves on other kids. And that's where it really becomes an issue for the police to investigate, and obviously an issue for counselling for the victim, and notionally education and awareness for the offending party through the AWARE program or something similar. So we have lots of responses. There's lots of ways we can deal with children. The Children's Court is not, it's a far easier forum to have the law address children as children. Again, it's not a perfect world, but the ramifications for parties concerned can be made out, or education can be addressed as opposed to criminal repercussions.
Thank you, Bryce. I think you raised a really important point there when you referred to the offending party potentially acting out something that they may have seen or experienced themselves. And certainly with the use of technology, we have a lot more available to young people these days, but also obviously it can also be indicative of abuse that they may have experienced themselves. Britt, I might turn to you now. I'm interested to talk more around the risks associated with harmful sexual behaviours, in particularly looking at age discrepancies between children and potentially level of coercion. From your experience, that would be great.
Yeah, look, Child Protection receive reports from various places around concerning interactions between children, and we have a protocol with police that we have to notify police if we get a report, and vice versa with them in relation to a child. Child Protection consider all cases with children up to the age of 17. So if a child is already 17, they won't fall into the Child Protection remit. We do look at age as a particular factor in terms of particularly around consensual relationships and what that actually means. So if there's a large age gap between two children or a child and an adult, that would certainly raise alarm bells for us in terms of how is the younger child able to consent, and how much knowledge do they have, and whether there's any coercion or power differential in their relationship. So basically, and Bryce can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the laws, and they've changed a little bit over time, for a child over 16, if there's less than 2 years, if there's greater than 2 years age difference and the child is over 16, it's not considered a criminal offence, although some of those 16-year-old relationships still certainly raise concerns from us in terms of aggression and power imbalances. The risks associated with sexual behaviour are really twofold, and Child Protection don't tend to really get involved in terms of an investigation with victims. We would certainly make sure that victims are receiving support and that their family are well supported by services like SECASA, so that they can have some counselling and move through and unpack what's happened to them, and really develop their boundaries and understand why people were concerned by the interaction perhaps, and develop some protective behaviours of their own for themselves. In terms of the child that may be considered not the victim, again, it's become really tricky in this age where we have children playing Grand Theft Auto and seeing all sorts of violent sexual encounters. and seeing that as potentially normal. And we've certainly seen an increase in terms of, it goes beyond what we would call exploration, but in terms of the aggression used in sexual interactions between children. And for the most part, most of these children really need support. There needs to be acknowledgement from parents and education. And again, the AWARE program is fantastic in terms of working with those children around developing boundaries, understanding what's normal, what's not normal, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. The whole concept of consent and social media and sharing pictures has become a much more complex playing field than it ever has before. And it's really, we get the best outcomes for children, victims and perpetrators, where there is some acknowledgement, where there's adult buy-in into and some insight into the concerning behaviour, and that we can facilitate support, education, counselling. It becomes really hard in this community in particular for children, where you've got children moving between schools and information not necessarily being shared. Children attending school, and the school may know that there's some level of concerning interactions and behaviours or blown boundaries, and whether that's shared with the synagogue, whether that's shared with youth movements, whether that's shared across, you know, carnivals just happened, all of those sorts of forums where we have large gatherings of children. And it's not only about the potential for that child to harm others, it's also about that child and their potential being put into a situation that is a little bit outside of their normal environment, and whether there are safety plans or behaviour management plans in place for them in all of the aspects of their lives. So the more that we can really carefully share information for children, the more that we can provide education support, and the more buy-in we have from parents, the better it is. But unfortunately, in this community and in the wider community, it's still a topic that's obviously got a lot of angst attached to it, and people get a bit cagey around the discussions and sharing. And we do absolutely need to be very cautious and careful and protect people's privacy. You don't want kids labelled. You don't want people not invited to parties because they're potentially considered to be a risk to other children. It's all about education, safety and containment. And they would be the main risks associated. And that's what we work really hard together with police and with services like SECASA to ensure that we're all on the same page, and we're attacking each situation from all different angles and making sure everyone's well supported.
Thank you, Britt. And I think you've done a great segue to the next question that I'd actually like to pose to you, Suzanne. And I think one part that, as we lead the conversation from what actually is a harmful sexual behaviour to the risks associated, is actually how do you assess a child who potentially has been cited to have been involved in inappropriate behaviour, or whether it's an accusation or whether it's a valid fact. I know that before you mentioned that it was around whether they were actually accused of inappropriate behaviour. So it'd be really interesting to hear, particularly from your perspective and also from the perspective of the SECASA AWARE program, what that looks like. And I think given our audience, it might also be good if we could touch on how services could actually reach out to you and your program as well.
Yep, sure. It is a fantastic question, and I wish more people asked us direct questions about risk assessment, because there are quite a few, I guess, misconceptions about risk in relation to harmful sexual behaviours out there in the community and amongst many schools across Victoria. I really wish that I could tell everyone that we have a magical tool that we do apply that assesses the risk and comes back and says, yep, there's a 17.7% chance that little Johnny is going to touch his sister again. But unfortunately, we don't. So there's actually no actuarial risk assessment tool that exists that can predict a young person's rate or chance at which they will re-engage in a harmful sexual behaviour. We do, however, use what we call risk assessment tools to help us hypothesize what types of factors in that young person's life could lead to things happening again. So we have general domains that we test and assess for that we know scientifically are linked to young people engaging in harmful sexual behaviours. So for example, one of our risk assessment tools that we do apply is called the ERASER, And that's a 22-point scale system that we sit down as a clinician, and we actually mark through that document after a long time of getting to know the person, and we check off factors in that risk assessment tool that are present in that young person's life or not present. And the more of those factors that are present in the young person's life, scientifically, the higher chance that they may re-engage in a behaviour again. So therefore, but we don't have a specific number. It doesn't give you a number. So it doesn't give you a percentage, and it also doesn't give you a category. It doesn't give you a low, medium, high. It's just a likelihood. So when we're doing those types of risk assessments, they're a really major part of what informs our assessment process. So as we're getting to know a young person, we typically spend 7 to 8 appointments with that young person, getting to assess them and their family, their life, what's going on at school, assessing where they're at in their development emotionally, physically, psychologically, and within that assessment phase of those 7 to 8 sessions, that's where we're running these risk assessment tools. Those tools are really important because they help us identify what domains or categories of that person's life maybe aren't going too well or are quite problematic, and therefore maybe in line with increasing the chance that the kid might engage in those behaviours again. Those parts of the risk assessment tool then become part of our intervention plan. So when we've assessed the young person, we put together an assessment report, and in that assessment report, we try and target each of those domains that we believe could be linked to the young person doing the behaviour again. So for example, some of the domains on those reports might be the fact that the young person has been sanctioned prior for the behaviour. So if the young person has been told off before for some harmful or problematic sexual behaviour, but is repeatedly doing the behaviour despite being sanctioned by an adult, that's a risk factor that we need to look at. If there's not an active safety plan in place that really highlights what's going on for the family and maybe has some really clear supervision in place for that young person, that's another risk factor. If it's a young person who shows excessive interest in violence, that's another risk factor, but sexual violence or excessive interest in having sexual activity with children, that's another risk factor that we target. So these documents help us sort of tailor the intervention to that young person. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm actually wondering, what would the role of the school be potentially in the assessment process?
Yeah, we typically work with a lot of schools, and we by no means expect the school to be doing any form of the assessment process. That would be very stressful for them. It's fantastic if the school, though, however, can work with us collaboratively to give us information about how the young person is at school. We need consent from the parent or carer to engage with the school. So typically by the time we've got to contacting a school, it means we've sat down with mum or dad or auntie or uncle or foster mum, foster dad, or the department if they're the legal guardian, and we've got that person's consent to reach out to the school. Then we begin to sort of target who in the school might have a good understanding of the young person. And we could reach out to wellbeing, we could reach out to the principal, to the class teacher. We'll have figured out with the family, carer or guardian how much information they are comfortable for us to share with the school. So that's a case-by-case process as well. If the harmful sexual behaviour, for example, has occurred at home between siblings, there may not even be an appropriate reason for us to talk to the school about that behaviour. However, if the behaviour has occurred at school, more times than not, we really want to be involved with the school and have them on board with safety planning and assist them, because it's part of our role is to assist in keeping students safe and that young person safe too. So in terms of the school's role in that, it would be providing us information and observations, letting us know how the young person responds at school, possibly to redirection or authority. We're really interested to know how they behave socially at school, how they are with their social cues. But the school isn't expected ever to take on an investigative or an assessment position, but we do acknowledge that they have such insight into these young people that we don't. So we only literally see these young people for maybe an hour 1 hour a week is our minimum expectation. But these kids are at school, hours upon hours a day. So teachers do have a lot of information that's vital to our assessment process. We can also go out to schools to run that safety plan with them on site. So some schools really enjoy that when we go out and we can physically see the space and understand where the young person's interacting and get a sense maybe of where things occurred. And that helps us in terms of identifying physical structures or barriers as well that we might need to take into consideration when planning for safety or supervision of that young person at school.
I wonder, Suzanne, if that also takes into consideration potentially cultural factors. Obviously, this is predominantly surrounding a Jewish community, but certainly any other closed community or cultural background potentially would have implications, be it that they attend a youth movement, a synagogue, or whatever the case may be. I'm just wondering what level of involvement that would be in terms of consideration for their risk assessment.
Yeah, definitely. When we're doing our assessment of the young person and the family in that initial stage, because we do those 7 to 8 appointments at the start where we assess everything, and that's what we call a multidimensional assessment. So we're looking at all aspects of that young person's life prior to moving into our intervention stage, which is the intervention stage is where we'd be supplying that young person with one-to-one counselling that may be therapeutic, it could be educational, it could just be heavily knowledge-based. It could be play therapy-based, depending on the age of the person. So intervention's a whole different thing. But in terms of that assessment, we frequently work with young people and families who feel incredibly embarrassed and horrified and ashamed and guilty. They want to keep things secret. They don't want anyone to know. Usually by the time they've made it off our wait list and made it through our door, they're an anxious mess. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They haven't told their friends. So we're constantly dealing with people that do feel really awkward about this. And particularly part of our assessment does look at the cultural factors within each family unit and within each community that the family live in. So we work with lots of different communities across Melbourne. But that's definitely part of the assessment, is taking into account, well, what does this mean in your community? So in your community, how do people react to this kind of behaviour if they know? And what do we need to take into consideration to make sure that we are appropriate within that, but make sure that we keep the safety of everyone as the #1 priority? So we're really open to those conversations.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think it would be a great opportunity for us now to talk to Murray in terms of the school's involvement. I know we've already had a question regarding information sharing. We absolutely will get to that. But Murray, I suppose what I'm interested to know from your perspective is, how should educators or potentially other adults respond to such behaviours or circumstances? Sorry, Murray, you're on mute. There you go, Britt. It wasn't just you.
There you go, Britt. I'm in good company, Britt. I guess there's 2 parts to that story. It's how a school responds to the needs of that young person, or how an individual responds. Coming at my background is in education. I've been in education a long time, and I was a school principal for many years. And I guess the balance of responsibilities within a school setting, and the duty of care, not only for the kids, but also for the school community and staff. It can be an absolute balancing act at times. I think the key, and I noticed there's a comment in the chat there about communicating and information. I think the key for our kids, remembering I work in the out-of-home care space, the key for our kids, whether it be with regard to harmful sexual behaviours or just really any issue, is that respectful but effective communication. Most school placements, or I shouldn't say most, but a large percentage of school placements for our kids break down because of poor communication flow, where people don't have the information they require to wrap the supports around these kids. So that would probably be one of the first places I would start, is to ensure that the people who need to know do know. And a lot of that in the state system is through the school support service officers. So they're your allied health people that work within the school system, and it's often they will communicate that to each other and in the normal course of their work. There's strict controls around who has access to files and all that sort of stuff, which I know it's the same in the Catholic system. I assume it's the same in the independent system, where there's checks and balances and controls around that. The supports for young people, I believe the supports for young people who are displaying these behaviours are very similar to the supports that are outlined in the partnering agreement, which is designed to redress some of the disadvantage that our kids have experienced. But they're the same supports that a lot of these kids need. Oh, sorry, Suzanne. I thought you were waving. You were trying to turn your lights back on.
Sorry, as my light keeps going on. Ignore me.
I was going to say, yes, Suzanne. What would you like to say? So I think one of the important things is wrapping those supports around the kids. So that care team sort of concept, where you've got the people responsible for that young person in the one team, making sure that everyone within that team maintains their role. It just confusion for the young person if people start to step outside of their role. So, you know, the teacher is there to teach, not to be a friend, not to be a counsellor. The counsellor is there to provide that therapeutic support, not to be a friend. So maintaining the role is really, really important. I guess, yeah, well, that care team thing is really important for a whole lot of kids that need extra support. The next sort of key piece is with our kids is the school and the carer. In your situation, most often it's the school and home. You know, the school and the parents working together around these issues. That's where I've seen it.
I think you touch on such an important point there, Murray, about open communication. And given the fact that this is such an uncomfortable topic, and even simply looking at the tremendous response we've had to people wanting to attend today's forum, I think it indicates that this is a topic that we need to continue to talk about and to talk quite widely. And obviously your circumstance in your school is potentially quite different from some of the other independent schools. But I think still the premise is the same, that we need to have an open line of communication. And I really take heed with your note about sort of staying in your own lane. I think it's really important. And I think potentially that's where teachers in particular might feel uncomfortable, is that they feel they have to do more than potentially they're qualified to do. So I suppose my question to you then, from your perspective, is how do you feel, I suppose, your involvement would be in either the assessment or even the management of challenging or problematic sexualised behaviours within a school? And I know it might be a bit different for you too, given that you don't have sort of four walls around you in your school, and it's quite global in terms of the fact that it's digital. But I imagine that the behaviour concerns that for each child would still be pertinent.
Yeah, it's only been digital since COVID hit. We get called in, we get young people referred to us. That's how we get involved. So there's a heap of kids in out-of-home care and statutory care who do really, really well. So we kind of work at that tier 2, tier 3 space, I guess. Our involvement often around kids displaying harmful sexualised behaviour is around the safety planning and bringing in the resources and trying to get appropriate and ongoing therapeutic supports for these kids, because you can't just put a boundary around them and say, right, we're done, and high five each other. It's about developing strategies within that young person to deal with what they're feeling. You know, we're in the business of producing good people, and we need to put those therapeutic supports in for kids. And I'm sure Britt will agree with me that they're not always that easy to track down. particularly ongoing supports that are targeted to what the kid needs.
It's interesting, Murray. I think you've now been the third, if not fourth person who's mentioned a safety management plan. I know we're going into our question time at the moment, and Michelle, I'm not sure how many questions potentially we have waiting in our chat function, but it might be good if potentially whoever really from the panel feels that they would like to speak to this, maybe could explain the benefits of a safety plan and what it actually looks like in practice.
Can I start?
Yeah, you start, Murray.
Look, I just want to say that the safety, if you look at, everyone knows Maslow's triangle. Okay, there's another one though that says if a kid's not feeling safe, you're not going to get anything else. So that safety issue is just so important. I just wanted to say that now I will respectfully be quiet.
Generally, the safety plan depends on the concerns displayed or the behaviour displayed by the child, but it could be something like, I've seen fairly tight ones like a child is not to be unsupervised at recess or lunch, that there always needs to be an aide or a carer or a teacher or someone having some oversight into their interactions in the playground, depending on their age and stage. There are safety plans around where children can go to the bathroom if there's been incidents in the bathrooms, if that's been an area of concern. They could perhaps have to use a staff toilet or something. It depends on the situation. It's hard to talk to exactly, but it's around who has some oversight, the behaviour that's acceptable and not acceptable, what are the reporting lines if there are concerns raised, where does the information get shared to, and who's checking in with the young person on a daily basis, particularly in a school environment. If Aware are working with the family, they may have some conditions with the family around perhaps not a good idea to attend school camp at this point in time until assessment is completed or until further intervention or work is achieved. It could be around who they housed in a room with, if there's a particular age range, or if it's a youth group sort of setting. So it's very large and broad, and depends on the behaviour that we've seen exhibited. It also depends on who's involved and who's aware of the behaviours, which is part of our problem that we're working on in our community.
Rahi, if I could interject, because there's some really good questions here, and sorry, Yvonne, I will come to your question, but I think Gid Goldberg's question is very important at this stage. It's about what steps can those in the youth movement have when they recognise worrying behaviours in a child and the parent is not on board with the steps the organisation would like to take in educating the child. I wonder if that could start maybe with Britt, as to if an organisation, a youth movement, has worrying behaviours about a child, what do they do?
I would encourage the first conversation to be with parents, to highlight the behaviours and why they see that as concerning. Where parents aren't on board in acknowledging that, then I would encourage a report to Child Protection. And that doesn't mean that Child Protection are going to go running and knocking on people's doors, but it may start to form a picture of a bigger problem perhaps appearing over time. So if that report came on the back of a report from the school saying we're concerned about this child's interaction with other children, it may then be enough for us to reach out to parents and say, we're concerned about this behaviour. Have you thought about a referral to services? Or perhaps we could encourage the school to initiate protective behaviours work for the whole class or the whole year level. And we've done that lots of times, where we have services that go out and really talk to children about what's appropriate, what's not, what are the boundaries, and sometimes that education may be enough in certain circumstances. Yeah, that's probably where I'd begin, and report to Child Protection with concerns. It doesn't always result in investigation, but it's certainly good to build up a story if there is a pattern emerging, and we can point people in the right direction. It can sometimes just be a consultative sort of process.
Suzanne, do you have anything to add to that?
Our approach is really similar. We would be encouraging professionals out there in the community and youth services to try and engage the parent or the carers first. It's always best if you can be collaborative and transparent about these things, even though sometimes our gut reaction is to do the opposite, because by keeping that information secret or covered, it usually just escalates things and makes things worse for the young person who's engaged in those behaviours, because it's modelling that this is something we don't talk about, therefore we can't fix it. Whereas we actually can talk about it and we can fix it dramatically. It's about 2% of young people re-engage in these kind of behaviours if they've been given an intervention about that behaviour. So it's a tiny statistic. So yeah, trying to engage the parents or carers first, but always knowing that you do have the right as a professional and you're expected to call the department. We do that all the time here at the program. We'll make every effort we can to get mum and dad or grandma on board first. If things aren't going the way we need to and we've exhausted all those efforts, we're really comfortable to call the department, who may need to step in and assist us in helping that family take a different perspective on safety.
And I think that's a really good, an important point, Suzanne, is that a lot of the time, specifically within closed communities like the Jewish community, people are afraid to make that phone call because they're worried about the implications of what that call will mean. I think, as Britt really eloquently put it, it's part of a wider picture. And so it's a matter of giving the information, and then Britt and her team will determine if it meets the threshold and what needs to be done with that. There's certainly no clear direction between one phone call and an outcome where a child is removed or the like. There's much more involved there, and I think that's something that a lot of people are unaware of. And so the more that we open up those lines of communication and report to the resources that are available to us, I think the more that this conversation can become more widespread, and then we can reach the educational piece that Britt was talking about before. Maybe, Suzanne, you could also, and I don't know if this is out of your area, but certainly SECASA have a range of educational programs that go into schools. Perhaps you could touch on that.
Yeah, definitely. SECASA does have a range of programs that can go out to schools to speak to either students or teachers. And that can be really tailored to whatever a school needs. So we have a projects and innovations team here that's recently sort of been redeveloped, and that team can be contacted, or any staff really at SECASA, and they can feed it up to them in terms of what you need. So we used to have a schools program that would frequently go out and discuss consent and sexual development with young people. But our team, the AWARE team, is available to design talks and seminars and workshops as well to families and to teachers who want to learn more about these types of behaviours as well and how to respond to them. So that's really easy. It's just phoning SECASA and inquiring about what it is you might need. And it might be, say, a community development chat, sort of like today. Today's, it's a very short time today. Today's just sort of like a snippet of how all of us services work together in this context of harmful sexual behaviours. Or it may be a more in-depth workshop that the school needs. It might be a parent-teacher night that you want us to come to present on our service. SECASA is really flexible, and we need to be, because this kind of, I guess, this event or this phenomenon of harmful sexual behaviours is really complicated.
Thank you, Suzanne. And perhaps we'll make available some resources when we send out the recording, as I mentioned before, from all the key parties that have spoken today to help direct people with their inquiries. I am aware that we have one more question. Now, is this the original question that was on the general chat, Michelle, that Yvonne had?
Yes.
So I'm wondering, Bryce, whether potentially you might be able to help us with this question. The question is, in school situations, can school staff be accused of defaming a child if information about sexualised or other behaviour is passed on to other schools? And I'm assuming that this is a question asking without parental permission.
Okay, I'm certainly not a solicitor that would deal in that field. There are a number of protections for communities or for schools and for professionals in certain areas if they believe that there is an identified significant risk. So I'm not sure at what level we're talking, but I'm sure through the education department, if the education department become aware that a child is of a significant risk, well, my assumption would be the education department through transferring a child to another school, it would have to be on the file.
I wonder whether this is different, Bryce, for independent schools, and I think this is where some of the issues have arose. And I'm assuming maybe Britt also might want to interject just before we finish for today. I'm wondering whether if teachers are feeling at a loss to be able to report, if reporting to child protection might be their first point.
All schools are obliged to mandatory report behaviour of a criminal nature to both child protection or the police. If they make the report to child protection will refer the matter to us, and if they make the referral to us, we'll refer it back to child protection, which kind of is a catch-all for the problematic kids. It depends on what we're saying and the evidence that we're saying it on. If it's just a rumour and innuendo, I think there could be some difficulties. But if they become aware that a child has been offended against, or if it's reported to them that a child's been offended against, certainly both VicPol and Department of Human Services must be notified. So I just between individual schools on a rumour and innuendo, I don't know that would be a terribly safe way to go.
Thanks, Bryce. Britt, did you have something you'd like to add just before we finish for today?
Yeah, and I'll try and keep it quick. Basically, if there are, it's not the issue of reporting. You must report to child protection. Child protection can absolutely contact schools and let them know if we are concerned about a child's behaviour and they've moved schools as a result of that. Where there's a situation where there are some concerns and the young person has not been charged for whatever reason, teachers do need to, and schools do need to be very careful about privacy breaches and lawyered up parents, perhaps. So you do need to be careful of that, and that's a real conundrum for the schools. We have spoken to a number of principals, and they assure us that they do share information across each other where they can, but where there are allegations that haven't necessarily been proven, it's a tricky space for a lot of people. We're waiting for the information sharing scheme to become relevant for the education for schools, which will happen later this year, and that will absolutely give schools more capacity to share relevant information that impacts on safety and well-being of other children. So that will put the schools in a much better position to share information. I would suggest that information remains at a principal level because they'll be far more across where things are at around critical incidents and situations and legal implications. So that's probably my best advice. Doesn't stop you from calling child protection. You are protected as a reporter calling child protection. We do not reveal who has called us. So that's probably the best place if you're unsure of a situation, you don't feel comfortable talking to a school principal for whatever reason. So yeah, that's probably the shortest answer I can give in that space.
Thank you, Britt. And I think we would all welcome that change to the educational system. So if we do get an update, we'll share that widely once that has come into force. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our wonderful presenters, Murray, Britt, Bryce and Suzanne. Your information that you've shared with us today has been absolutely fascinating, but you've shared such a wealth and plethora of information that I dare say we're going to have requests to have a part 2 to this conversation in terms of how best to take those first steps, particularly from an organisational perspective. So thank you again for your time, and thank you everybody else. We've had such interest in this topic. It's been wonderful, and thank you for the remarkable questions that you've had. What we will do is we will encourage you to let us know how you found today's session. If there is any feedback that you'd like to give us, please feel free to give us an email, and we might even be able to put together a short survey at some point. We'd love to know if there are particular topics that you're keen to hear about. These sessions, as I understand it, will continue. So if there's something in particular that you'd like, or someone else in your network would be interested to hear, please do let us know, and hopefully we can cover it next time. So thank you everybody very much, and I'll let you go on to your evenings.
Thank you.
Michelle, I think you're on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Rahi, for excellent moderating of this moderating of this session. And please, yes, we will be sending out emails, so anybody who wants any other topics to be covered, the JCCV will certainly be working very hard to respond to communities with those requests. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's a great offer. We might have to
no
take
problem.
you up on that.
That's fine. It's such a huge topic.
It really is.
And I feel sometimes that it takes a couple of goes to have these conversations, also for people to feel comfortable to ask more questions. Yeah, so this might just be an introductory kind of session today.
And it was quite broad too. So we might find that in our next session, we might pick a very particular, maybe community organisation, or maybe even some scenarios that have been quite familiar in our community and the like. I think this is a topic that has definitely sparked interest. It's been one of our most attended sessions thus far. So it's definitely a sign that there's lots of interest, which is good, because we need that interest in order to ensure the safety of young people.
Definitely. And I think also for Jewish schools to know that there's lots of schools that face similar feelings around this. Like, I was literally just working with a school last week. It's not a Jewish school. It is a private Catholic school, and they've expelled a young person for engaging in harmful sexual behaviours, but there was no support provided to that young person. And now, due to that, there's been some really detrimental effects to that young person's mental health. So, just like a snapshot scenario of how we can sort of move someone on, but the ripple effect of doing so and not having, I guess, provided correct safety planning when that occurred. So that's just a snapshot example of how it does happen at a lot of schools.
Absolutely. And I think if we're looking in the Jewish community in particular, which is a very close-knit and closed community, we want to offer support to those who potentially have perpetrated the behaviour, but also to those who have experienced it as well. And one thing that I do like to continue to go back to is the potential that the person who has perpetrated the behaviour may have actually experienced abuse themselves. And so the idea of sending them off to another organisation and be somebody else's problem, so to speak, and not actually giving them the support they require is detrimental to another young person's life and their families. So
and that might be something that that you're open to in the future, is we could even provide like profiles of young people in terms of giving a snapshot of that person's history, because something like 70% of our clients have experienced extreme violence of some form prior to engaging in the behaviour. So there's lots of correlations between violence and family violence and prior sexual assault linked to these behaviours. So you're right, there is usually a victim history.
I think also we might, on that topic, probably need to consider, Michelle, for us to run a parent session as well, because I do think that today was considerably more professionals. And I think that parents need to know how to navigate this space as well. And I'm sure they have a lot of pertinent questions about where to go for support, particularly if they feel that they can't reach out to someone at the moment. So the more that we can make your service aware, available to the community, the better. Although I am also conscious that you have an extremely long waiting list.
It's okay. It is what it is. At the moment, we're not tracking too bad. We're looking at a 6 to 8 week at the moment. Sorry, 6 to 8 week wait at the moment, which for us is relatively quick. And we're interviewing more clinicians tomorrow, actually. So
fantastic.
Yeah, hopefully that wait list won't get any longer. It will just get shorter. But yeah, so about 2 months wait. But while people are on our wait list, we make contact with them to make sure that their immediate safety is considered. So they're not waiting for that 2-month period without hearing from us at all. Part of my role as the lead clinician is to check in with them and manage that wait list and triage things up and down the list in terms of immediacy, and to particularly check in on parents to see how they're coping with what's going on.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. You've been such a helpful and considerate participant today. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Michelle, for the opportunity for everyone to come together for this yet again. The JCCV are absolutely leading the front when it comes to safeguarding, and I look forward to the next session.
Great, thank you so much.
And thank you to those that continued to stay on. It's a topic that really engenders a lot of interest, and Suzanne fabulous. Lovely to see you. And
Yeah, good to see you too.
and we will certainly continue this conversation. I think there's a lot of interest, as Rahi was indicating, for a parent session. So that might be one of the next things that we pursue. So thank you, and we'll be in touch. And thank
Sounds
you.
good. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.